Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Just going to give people a couple of minutes to join us. In the meantime, if you're joining us right now, I just want to know where you're from, where you're watching us. Any information regarding where you're at would be ideal, just to know how many people are here, etc. And that way we can connect. So it's currently 12:01 in Ontario. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to join us, and then we'll get started. And yeah, if you want to go ahead and in the comments leave your location, your name, where you're currently watching, that would be great. We're going to be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so I highly recommend that you stay until the end so we can go ahead and answer those questions. So I'll give everybody a couple of minutes, and then we would get started. Today we're going to talk about the benefits of knowing French or learning French and how it could potentially get us to permanent residence. Now, I have someone from my team, Anna. She's going to be helping me answer some of your questions. If it's anything immigration related, please keep in mind that she won't be able to answer those questions per se. She'll try her best, but in the scenario that she can't, I will most definitely answer them at the end. So give people a couple of minutes to get started. Again, if you want to let us know where you're watching us, that would be great. And then once I have a little bit more people joined, we will get started. So it is now 12:02, so I'm giving people a minute or so to start. Now, the session will be recorded, so you can always access it through our YouTube channel. For whatever reason you're unable to stay or you want to rewatch it because it's something that you probably missed, then you can most definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll have information there regarding the webinar. Okay, so I think we'll get started now. It is currently 12:02. I will let you guys know a little bit about me. My name is Sandra Velosa. I'm an immigration consultant certified here in Canada. I've been working in the profession for a little bit over 5 years now. So very glad to be here with you. We're really going to be focusing on French. And I know we've heard this all over social media, YouTube, Instagram, learn French. But I really want to focus on why it's so important and why we think that it is the golden ticket for your PR, for obtaining your PR. So we're going to break it down. We're specifically going to focus on the Francophone category draws that Express Entry is doing right now. And in order to do that, we really need to look at Express Entry as a whole. So we're going to tell you a little bit about us, who we are as a company, who am I, just in case you don't know us. I'll give you an opportunity to get to know us and ideally work together if the opportunity presents itself. Again, we're going to be talking about or giving you a very brief summary of Express Entry. Now, Express Entry is a selection system. It's not an immigration program, but a selection system for PR. And it has 3 programs under it. So we have the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Canadian Experience Class, and the Federal Skilled Trades Program. It's important to understand the eligibility criteria of each of these programs and then really discuss in detail the Francophone category selections. So in order for you to understand the Francophone selections, we need to understand Express Entry. So we're going to give you a brief overview and context. However, we're not going to get into details because, again, Express Entry is a whole system, a whole presentation on its own, but how it relates to this. We'll end with a Q&A, so I'll leave it open for any questions that you may have. If you want to keep those until the end, that's fine. If you want to put them in the chat, I can most definitely come back to them at the end and then answer them. And then we'll give you information about us, how you can contact us, how you can get in touch with us, either via WhatsApp, via email, etc., all over social media, so we can always stay connected. So Velosa Immigration is a company funded by myself. It's located in Canada, Ontario specifically. We specialize in legal immigration advice, specifically for those that are looking to enter Canada on temporary status, whether be it through a visa, super visa, work permit, study permit, or for anybody that's currently in Canada or even outside and looking to obtain PR, right? So we really focus on helping both. Now, keep in mind that we deal with all types of cases with the exception of refugee cases. It's not something that we're focusing on right now. It might be something that we will offer in the future. However, if that's something that you're interested in or you think that you want to learn more about, or you qualify, or whatever the case may be, then we can definitely guide you through the right path. We do work with some consultants that specialize in this, so we can always refer you to them. Now, we were funded during the pandemic. I think like everybody else, kind of reinvented myself. So prior to the pandemic, I have experience both in the public and private sector. I've worked with newcomers, youth at risk, also in corporate sales, etc. But I really wanted to follow my passion, so I decided to study the immigration consultant course. And I established my own business, and I've never looked back ever since. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have helped more than 500 families. Because I speak Spanish, I'm originally from Colombia. Most of our clientele comes from South America, Latin America specifically. That's not to say that we haven't worked with others. So we've actually worked with people in parts of Africa, like South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, also in Australia, parts of Europe, the Caribbean. So my husband's Jamaican. We've worked with people in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, etc. So pretty much all over the world. We don't discriminate when it comes down to our clientele, as long as we can communicate, whether it be in English or in Spanish. My colleague, who's also my partner, he speaks Italian. So again, if we can accommodate your language needs, it's perfectly fine. Now, with that said, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So as I mentioned, in order to understand the category-based selections, we need to understand express entry as a whole. So it's the main federal pathway or the system which has 3 programs under that does its own selection for permanent residents. Now, it uses a point system called the Comprehensive Ranking Score, and your CRS score is really based on your profile as a whole. So your age, your education, your work experience, your language proficiency, and other factors will provide you with a score. Now, that score is your own CRS score, and you're competing with other people that, like you, want to become permanent residents. So based on how many people are in the pool and the draws that are being done at the time, depending on the lowest score and how many invitations are issued, you may or may not have good possibilities of obtaining what's called an ITA, or invitation to apply to permanent residence. So just to get an understanding, express entry is the system. It's not the program itself. And under express entry, we have the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Canadian Experience Class, and the Federal Skilled Trades. Now, this presentation in particular is for people that speak French or are looking to study French, are looking for a pathway to obtain permanent residence, and are willing to live outside of Quebec. Let's understand that Quebec manages its own immigration system. Express entry, it's something for anybody that's looking to become a PR outside of Quebec, in its provinces or territories. Quebec has its own selection system, so this wouldn't apply for them. Now, the first program under express entry is the Federal Skilled Worker Program. So prior to COVID, we saw that a lot of people would actually come in through this program. A lot of people from Asia in particular would land in Canada already as a PR because they had qualified experience, they had the language proficiency, they had the education. I mean, they met all of the criteria, they checked all of the boxes. Today, now we're really seeing a focus in Canadian experience. We're really seeing a focus in Canada wanting to retain the people that are already here. However, that's not to say that those that speak French and are eligible through this program can come already as a PR, and it'll all make sense at the end. So in order for you to be eligible for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, you need to have at least a minimum of 1 year full-time work experience, which equates to 30 hours a week, a total of 1,560 hours. So we're not looking at the time per se, but the amount of hours accumulated. And it has to be skilled experience. So anybody working at least 1 year out of the 10 consecutive in occupations tier 0, 1, 2, or 3 would qualify. You also need to have what's called a Canadian language benchmark of 7 in French or English, right? So in order for you to be eligible for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, we need to meet those 2 criteria at minimum. You also need to obtain what's called an education credential assessment for your education. And that's basically going to give you an equivalency of your education from back home to Canadian standards. The most popular entity is called WES. And you need to have a minimum of 67 points out of 100 just to be eligible. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to receive an invitation. Just to be eligible, you need to have a minimum of 67 points. Once you've met those criteria, you pretty much are considered to be in the pool. And then based on your CRS score, you may or may not have good chances of receiving an invitation to apply for permanent residence. Keep in mind that if the system selects you through the Federal Skilled Worker Program, then you need to have sufficient funds based on the number of family members you have in your family in order for you to be eligible. So because you're coming from abroad, or the system is considering that you're coming from abroad, then you need to have a certain amount of funds, and the funds are going to depend on the number of family members you have. It's really calculated based on what's called the low income threshold. So for one person, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's roughly $20,000. Okay. Now, the benefits of French is that you can qualify for this program without ever having to study in Canada or work in Canada. As long as you have an intermediate French, you could potentially have a good opportunity to receive an invitation. What does this mean? That someone that is outside of Canada, that is bilingual per se, speaks both French and English, has qualified work experience, has a high level of education, whether it be a bachelor's or a master's, and is relatively young in age, then potentially could have a good opportunity to be invited for permanent residency without ever having to be inside the country again, without ever having to study or without ever having to work in Canada. Now, the second program under Express Entry is what's most known as Canadian Experience Class. So it's a CEC, and this is for candidates who have already worked in Canada. So you need to have a minimum of 1 year work experience. This work experience has to be obtained while you're outside of studying. So any work experience that you obtain during your studies won't count. So specifically for students, once you apply for your PGWP, that's when your work experience will start counting. Any co-op experience or things of that nature won't count for this program. The work experience has to be within the last 3 years, and we're really looking at experience that's qualified, so it's considered in tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. Now, depending on the work experience that you have, that's the Canadian language benchmark that you need to meet for your language proficiency. So if you have experience in tier 0 or 1, you're looking at a CLB 7. If you have work experience in tiers 2 or 3, then you're looking at a CLB 5. Now, there's no minimum education required, but this will obviously improve your CRS score. This is ideal for those who arrive perhaps with a closed work permit under the Francophone mobility. Give you a brief overview. Because there's been such a focus in French, the Francophone mobility program allows people with a job offer outside of Quebec the possibility of migrating to Canada with a work permit, as long as you can prove that you have a CLB 5 in listening and speaking. So if you have a job offer and you can prove that you have a CLB 5 in listening and speaking, your employer could technically support you in applying for a work permit through the Francophone mobility, depending on the work experience that you have and what your profile looks like, what your CRS score looks like. If you've obtained a year of work experience, we can then use this work experience to qualify under Canadian Experience Class. And then hopefully during this time, maybe your English has gotten better, gone from a 5 to a 7, and then we can start looking at the Francophone selections. Okay, you can apply after just 1 year of work experience, like I've mentioned, and no need to show proof of settlement funds. Why? Because once you are considered in the Canadian Experience Class, there's no requirement for funds to be shown if you can prove that you obviously have a job offer, and this job offer is going to, the annual income is going to cover what the LICO threshold is. Last but not least is the Federal Skilled Trades Program. I feel like this is the forgotten program. We haven't seen any invitations under this program. Nonetheless, we do have to discuss it. So this is really specific for people with experience in skilled trades, specific skilled trades for that matter. So the minimum requirements are you either have 2 years of full-time work experience in the last 5 years and a valid job offer or a certificate of qualification from a Canadian province or territory. Now, most trades will require you to receive some sort of certification, whether it be a red seal or not, pretty much attesting that you can work or qualify to work. So you could use that or a valid job offer. And then the language proficiency, we see is far lower than what we've seen with Federal Skilled Worker Program at Canadian Experience Class. We're looking at a CLB 5 in speaking and listening and CLB 4 in reading and writing. Again, there's no minimum education required, but it will increase your points. And this is specific for people in certain trades. So we're looking at anybody from electricians, plumbers, cooks, specifically chefs, not cooks per se, but chefs, carpenters, welders, industrial bushers, right? Now, the benefits of this program is that it has a lower language requirement and it's ideal for those who are in the trades. This will be ideal for anybody who has experience or meets these requirements, but can show a higher intermediate level of French in order to be considered. So now that we understand the 3 programs under Express Entry, for you to be able to consider or utilize your French, you need to at least meet one of those requirements to be eligible for one of these 3 programs. Now, the system, the way it works, is it's going to rank you based on your age, education, language, work experience, spouse factors, etc. So as I mentioned before, you need to meet the eligibility criteria of the 3 programs, one of the 3 programs that I've mentioned, and you're going to be assessed on your age. So the highest score is 110. So you get the highest score when at 29, and then you're going to be decreasing for that. Education, so anybody with a PhD will obviously have the highest, so on and so forth. Work experience in Canada. And then your spouse will realize that anybody with a spouse starts at a lower score. Why is that? Because your spouse is going to give you the additional points. So your spouse profile will also be assessed, and based on their profile, you're going to be granted more or less points. At times, we do say that it could be detrimental to have your spouse in some cases because you could actually score lower, and it will all depend on whether or not your spouse has a good English or French level or whether or not they have acquired Canadian Experience Class. So in this sense, depending on your spouse, it sometimes can affect your CRS score. Now, in terms of this new category-based selection, well, once someone is in the Express Entry pool, whether it be through Canadian Experience Class or as a Federal Skilled Worker, as a Federal Skills Trades, once you're in one of those categories, there's going to be other categories that immigration has launched. So we'll see invitations to apply under the Francophone program. Well, what does that mean? Anybody that wants to be selected, considered for this new category that was launched in 2023, you need to have a CLB 7 in French in all 4 proficiencies. This means reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So no band can be lower than 7. So someone can be eligible under Canadian Experience Class and still be considered through the Francophone selection as long as they meet that CLB 7 in French. This means that French can also be your main language. We don't necessarily need an English exam per se. And we've seen selections as low as 375. So I'll show you an example in the next slide, and you'll see when we compare the Canadian Experience Class selections in comparison with the Francophone selections, we'll see a higher number of invitations. So more people are getting invited if they speak French at a lower score. So it makes you wonder, is it beneficial for me to start really investing in this? Most definitely. So you'll also get additional points for being bilingual. So anybody that scored 7 or higher in all French and a CLB 4 in English, or didn't take an English exam at all, we're looking at 25 additional points. Now, if you've scored a 7 or higher in all French and a CLB 5 or higher in English, then the system automatically is going to grant you 50 points. So not only are you going to be more likely to get an invitation because the scores are lower and they're giving out more invitations for people that have a CLB 7 in French, but you're also getting additional points for being bilingual if you have some sort of English or no English at all for this matter. This is very, very important. So let's tie this all together. So we'll see here that July 8th, there was a selection for Canadian Experience class. 3,000 people were invited and the lowest score was 518. What does this mean? Let's put this into context. So if you were selected on July 8th, that meant that you had a minimum of 1 year work experience at minimum. You had, based on your work experience, you could have had anywhere from a CLB 5 to a CLB 7. And you had higher education or no education at all, but your score had to be 518 or higher. So you, out of those 3,000 people, anybody selected had to have a 518 or higher. What we've noticed is that in order for you to be selected in a round like this, you should have a minimum of bachelor's or master's degree, fairly young, and have probably 2 years of work experience, have studied in Canada, have work experience back home, and have studies back home, right? Not everybody is going to be selected with the bare minimum. More than likely, you're going to be having a CLB 9 or 10 in English in order for you to be selected under Canadian Experience class. But let's go down to March 21st, which was the last Francophone or French language proficiency selection that was made. And we realized that they almost doubled the number. So 7,500 people were invited. That means that those 7,500 people had to have had a CLB 7 in French. So not only did they have to be eligible through one of the 3 programs, Canadian Experience class, Federal Skilled Worker Program, or Federal Skilled Trades, but they also had to have had a CLB 7 in French. Again, they don't necessarily have to know English, as long as they can show a CLB 7 in French and be eligible in one of those programs that I've mentioned. So we need to be eligible in the main programs and have a CLB 7. The lowest score was 379. So those 7,500 people needed to have a 379 or higher for them to receive an invitation. This means that someone outside of Canada that is bilingual in both languages, that has higher studies and can show that they have skilled work experience, could potentially come to Canada as a permanent resident without the need to ever have studied or worked in Canada, because you would be eligible through the Federal Skilled Worker Program, and having a CLB 7 in French would make you eligible for this category as well. And this is when it starts to get interesting, because a lot of people have invested time and money in studying in Canada, which can be very expensive, already having studies back home, when we're realizing that the focus has really been people who speak French. We're seeing a lot of flexibility from the government in terms of people that speak French, people that are bilingual, not only for PR, but for temporary residents as well, through the Francophone Mobility Program, and just looking at the percentage of what they want to increment the population in 3 years or so in order for people to be outside of Quebec that can communicate in both languages. And we see that across the board. February 19, we had another Francophone or French language proficiency. 6,500 people were invited. The lowest score was 428. When we compare it to Canadian Experience class at 518, it's a big difference. Then we had another one in March 6, 4,500 at 410. So we're seeing more invitations at a lower number. Canadian Experience class, it has been dropping. So from June 12th, it went from 529. Then we saw 521 on the 26th of June and 518. But it still remains over 500 as opposed to the French language proficiency category draws. And we see that less invitations. So we're looking at 3,000 invitations as opposed to 4,000 or 7,000 that we've seen in the past for French. So Why act now? Why is this so important? Francophone draws are active. They've been active. We've seen numbers as low as 379 in comparison to other draws. So it's important to start really taking this into consideration. If you want to become a permanent resident, if this is something that you've been yearning, if you've already invested it in Canada, whether you came here to work or to study and you want to now become a permanent resident, or you're outside of Canada, you're thinking, should I study French? Should I study English? I think it's very important to start considering this as a way to become a permanent resident through the ability of managing and communicating in the French language. So it is a federal immigration priority right now. They've made this very known. The numbers that they want to meet are pretty high. And I think it's important to start leveraging this. So you can transition from temporary residence with the right strategy, as long as you understand how the system works, how you can benefit from it. So if you speak French, want to live in Canada, are willing to relocate, whether you're in Quebec, you're outside of the country, and want to obtain permanent residence, then I think this is the way to go. I think this is what you should do. For more information, what we're doing is we're offering free education consultations in terms of what classes you can take for French, how you can meet the CLB-7. We work with a school that right now offers what's called a preliminary test. They'll basically take that test and you'll see what level you're at and how many weeks you need to get to a CLB-7. You can do intense courses or courses that really accommodate to your schedule. Most of the courses are going to be virtual. If you're already in Canada, you can do some that are in person. The goal is to start really planning ahead, whether you have 2 years on your work permit or you're currently a student and you're trying to figure out what's going to happen after. Well, let's invest some time and money into learning French, because we see that it's really what's getting people their PR with a lot more flexibility than other programs, even provincial nominee programs. Specifically in Ontario, we've seen that the province has been quite stagnant in the invitations. So we want to make sure that we start looking at Plan B and how we can really leverage the possibilities that are available for us in order for us to become permanent residents. We do have an Instagram page. Our Instagram Spanish is much more active, I would say, in terms of numbers. Nonetheless, we offer the same information in English. So Velosa Immigration CA. We also have a WhatsApp number. This number doesn't receive calls, but you can most definitely message us through WhatsApp, and one of our reps will be in touch with you. So go ahead and shoot us a message, or you can always send us an email at info@velosaimmigration.com, and we would be more than glad to help you. I don't see any questions in the chat. I want to make sure that before I leave, if there's any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you don't have any questions, then I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. And it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to give this information to everybody, really work with people, and hoping that we can help more and more families become permanent residents. So if there's no more questions, once again, thank you for your time and have a great day.